So we're going to hold off just a few minutes on opening this hearing, waiting for Charles to bring, I guess the PowerPoint's not working, so we're alternate means. We're waiting on that. It's a little after 1:30, so we will call the Board of Commissioners public hearing for file number 439-25-00003-LRP. We are here in the courthouse auditorium and on audio-video conference, and the purpose of this public hearing is to consider Jackson County Planning Commission recommendation of approval for a minor comprehensive plan map and zoning map amendment to change the comprehensive plan map from rural residential land to industrial land and rezone a parcel containing 16.59 acres from rural residential 5 to light and industrial on property described as Township 35 South, Range 1 West, Section 05, Tax Lot 1700, located at 2000 Rogue River Drive in Eagle Point. The application was submitted by Jay Harlan, CSA Planning Limited, agent for Paige Stevens and Brad Engel. This is file number 439-25-00003-LRP once again. We have with us today planning staff, Ted Zook, Director of Development Services, of Kristen Mays, Planning Manager, Charles Bennett, Planner 3, and our legal staff, Pete Filbert, Deputy County Counsel. And Mr. Filbert, could you read the admonishments, please, and the rules of the public hearing?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please remember to direct your testimony and evidence towards the criteria or rules set forth in the published notice for this hearing. Those criteria, rules, and standards will be further outlined for you by staff momentarily. You may also direct your testimony to other criteria in the comprehensive plan, land development ordinance, and other land use regulations which you believe apply to this decision. Understand that a failure to raise an issue with statements or evidence sufficient to give decision makers or other parties the ability to respond to the issue will preclude or prevent your appeal based on that issue. We are making a recording of the hearing. In the event of an appeal, it may be necessary to transcribe it. Therefore, when you testify or comment, please begin by identifying yourself so that anybody reading the transcript or record will know who's talking. We will first hear from staff, and the applicant will follow. Then we'll hear from those who wish to comment in favor of the application. Then we'll hear from those who are opposed. The applicant has the burden to prove its case, thus the applicant will have an opportunity to respond to the comments and opposition. Once everyone has had an opportunity to speak, the public hearing and the record will be closed unless there is a request for a continuance. If so, then another set of rules apply. However, if there is no continuance, then the commissioners will proceed to deliberate towards the final land use decision. Finally, we have a couple housekeeping issues to resolve. First, this is an opportunity for commissioners to announce whether they've had any ex parte contacts. If ex parte contacts have occurred, please discuss the nature and content of the ex parte contact or contacts so that the parties are aware of the substance of the communication when the hearing is open today and have an opportunity to rebut any evidence obtained ex parte. And second, this is an opportunity for commissioners to announce whether they have any actual or potential conflicts of interest with respect to the matter today or the applicant. If so, the commissioners can discuss the nature of that actual or potential conflict of interest. Are there any ex parte contacts or conflicts of interest to report?
I have none.
And I have none.
I don't have any conflicts. I have a potential ex parte communication, and I'll explain that just out of transparency. Late last summer, fall, I met with a relative of a friend that was either a prior owner or manager at KCI, and he was telling me about their wants to develop on this boat property, and that's all that was said. And then I toured their facility in White City on Antelope. But I just thought I'd really tell you that, and that's all I knew about it at that time. As far as I know, that person doesn't work there anymore either.
And the facility you toured is not the subject property?
No, it was their KCI business.
Okay. The rules for the public hearing are as follows. Only the chair or a member of the Board of County Commissioners may question the speaker. There will be no interruption of a speaker from the audience and no debates on the floor. Applause is not permitted. A speaker may criticize a proposal, the board, or an agency of the county, but the speaker should not argue with another speaker directly. Any speaker may present an opposite view, but not in personal terms. A person wishing to speak shall raise his or her hand and be recognized by the chair conducting the hearing. After being recognized, the speaker shall state his or her name or address before proceeding with his or her statement. The chair may limit the duration of presentation to the time necessary to cover factual information, and repetition shall be avoided. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, with that, I will request the planning staff report.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Apologize for the delay. We had our technical difficulties, but we got it resolved. Charles Bennett, 10 South Oakdale, Medford, Oregon, 97501. The application before you is a request for an amendment to the Jackson County Comprehensive Plan by taking exception to statewide goal 14 for a property at 2000 Rogue River Drive. Next slide, please. And maybe we could get that at full screen, or is that the best we can get at this time? That's a little bit better, thank you. This is the applicant's site plan of the subject property. The property is currently 16.59 acres, but has an approval to divide the property into roughly 3 5-acre parcels. And the northern portion of the parcel is to be rezoned. Next slide, please. There we go, thank you. This is the photo showing the site of the subject property in its it's pretty recent photo of what's the activity that's taking place at this time. And then the next slide is going to be the criteria. This is a list of applicable criteria to the case. Staff has concerns about some of the criteria not being met, which are detailed in the staff report on page 9 of the JCPC record. One of the key criteria staff is concerned with is OAR 660-004-0018 sub 2, found on page 14 of the record, which is to limit the uses, size, and density. However, the Planning Commission requested that the applicant work with the staff on additional findings and conditions that could meet the criteria. The applicant's additional findings and conditions were adopted as part of the Planning Commission recommendation, and the applicant and their attorney assured the Planning Commission that the criteria are met and are comfortable with defending their position. Next thing. The next one is, along with the applicant's findings, is a table of permitted uses and a list of conditions stipulated by the applicant, which will help mitigate impacts to the surrounding area. The listed permitted uses are listed on page 40 of the record. And I want to dive a little bit into the conditions, which have been page 79 of the record, which have been slightly revised for clarity. The applicant submitted a traffic impact analysis yesterday, so this condition might be able to be removed after a detailed review of the report. The land division to create 3 separate parcels will need to be perfected, and that's why there's a condition for that. A landscape buffer was recently submitted on Monday, but does not appear to meet the requirements of the LDO in section 9.2 and is not installed. So that is also a condition of this approval if you decide on an approval. The existing building square footage needs to be determined, so we have that in the record. And a short list of ongoing conditions such as hours of operation and lighting controls are also stipulated by the applicant. And finally, with that, the Planning Commission supports the approval of an amendment to the comprehensive plan map for a Goal 14 exception to change the existing zoning of approximately 5.7 acres to light industrial. And I can take any questions now or later.
Well, my question is, you're saying you're considering 5.7 acres to light industrial, but the purpose of the hearing on my description is 16.59 acres.
Correct. The property is 16.59 acres at the moment. They have an approval for a land division into 3 separate little parcels, but that hasn't been perfected yet. They haven't finished that application. It's been approved, but they have to get the survey and plat and meet those conditions associated with that. But so it's right now 1 entire property, but the zoning change would be only for the northern third.
For today's hearing.
For today's hearing.
Okay, thank you.
So on the list of conditions, would those conditions carry forward with if this was approved today for subsequent purchasers of the property?
Correct.
Okay, so my question is, why would we want to eliminate the traffic analysis if the property was sold in the future, if that condition was to stay on it?
They provided it.
Yeah, if they meet the conditions, the condition could be met.
But that condition would still be there in the future if the property was sold to a different purchaser in the future?
Right. The condition is to supply a traffic impact analysis. The condition doesn't require a traffic impact analysis for every subsequent use of the property.
Okay.
It may require it depending on the intensity of that, but I don't think, actually I believe that all the uses on that table are type 1 or 2, which wouldn't require a traffic impact analysis. It's a critical component to the criteria. Many of the criteria that were identified on the list, especially in the Planning Commission hearing, were related to traffic impacts. And then, so in theory, the traffic impact analysis that we have could alleviate a lot of those, or satisfy a lot of those criteria.
Perfect, thank you.
So I had, you said the buffer doesn't meet the requirements, and it's not installed, we know that, but how is it deficient, and is that easily curable, I guess, is a question we need to.
Well, it should be easily curable because there are standards. So when a site plan comes in for the new applicant, whoever the new applicant is, they will have to submit a type 1 or 2 site plan review. And that review will include standards that are in our land development ordinance chapters or section 9.2. The standards buffering, there's variable standards to that. I don't usually work on current planning files, but from my brief review of it, from the little time I had, the main concern with staff is that the proposal is to put the landscape buffering on neighboring portions of the newly divided property on the residential zone property. That landscaping needs to be on the subject 1/3 property. That's the key issue. There's probably some other issues with the landscaping.
So this was more or less a technical oversight. There's room on the subject property for the landscaping to go.
Yes, I mean, I think what you'll hear from the applicant is that it's paved, but that's the portion of the property that's going to be industrial. It doesn't make sense to put industrial buffering on a residential property, and which would have to be, there an easement associated with maintenance. There is some proportionality in our LDO that lets you put some of it on a neighboring property. I'm not sure that would be in this instance, because we're talking about an industrial site versus a residential site that's still there. So that's the main concern.
Okay.
Having all the buffering for the industrial buffering on the industrial site.
I understand.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? I understand. Okay. Then we will open the public hearing and we hear from the applicant first. Please give your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jay Harlan with CSA Planning with offices at 4497 Brown Ridge here in Medford. I don't have a big presentation. I think staff explained the basics, and the Planning Commission, I would say, went through it in some detail. We had 2 hearings and some additional information submitted between the hearings, and ultimately the Commission concluded and recommended that the requirements for goal exception can be satisfied, and we're confident that they can. We would request the board approve the goal exception, and I think we've worked with staff to address the use issues, and I think we've done a good job sort of line iteming out the things that wouldn't be appropriate for the neighborhood in the light industrial. So I just want to at this point speak to a couple things. One, Commissioner Sparacino had the question about the traffic study. The way those traffic studies are done when you do a plan amendment and zone changes, you look at kind of the potential of the site. So the traffic engineer looked at trip generation based upon kind of the range of uses that would be allowed, and you assume kind of a worst case scenario, and then you analyze that. Out there on Rogue River Drive, like, there's not a lot of traffic, so from a capacity standpoint, it was really all fine. Really the only question was on the north driveway, was there a sight distance issue, because there is a horizontal curve on that road. But the traffic engineers went out and measured it, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, and they did the thing and measured the sight distance and looked at the speeds and said, yes, it's fine, the sight distance is fine. So ultimately roads will review that, and I mean, that's a safety issue. It's not really as much of a land use planning issue. I mean, at any time, if the county roads finds that there's a safety issue with the driveway, they can close it and make you, if there's a way to relocate it, they can just do that. But I expect they will look at it and say sight distance is met based upon the posted speeds and the measured speeds, and it should be fine. So then going forward, the assumption is the uses that would go in there would have similar traffic patterns or less than what was analyzed in the traffic study, so there's no real need to revisit that going forward. So the only other thing that I wanted to speak to was we did submit, and I have some extra copies, so I'll just provide them, but these are already in the record, but just the buffering.
Thank you.
So we would request the board. So what happened was when we had a lot going on at the Planning Commission. Staff was recommending denial, so we were focused on some bigger things, and we just sort of agreed to do provide a buffer yard, right? And that's what we stipulated to. After the Planning Commission, we went and really started looking at it. There's a couple things. One that's in the table in the code, and I know the history here, right? There's different buffer yards depending on what's next to what, right? And it talks about this zoning being next to that zoning, right? And in the table, actually, it lists SFR zoning, right? Which the county doesn't have a SFR zoning. It has an urban residential zoning with different densities, and then it has a rural residential zoning. I know the history when the buffer yards in the county code were adopted in '04, because I was working at the county at the time, and the discussion was, well, it probably makes sense to have a standard that the landscape architects can relate to for Medford, because that's where they do most of the work. It got sort of transcribed so specifically that for residential, the zoning label is the Medford label, SFR, rather than the county label, right? In looking at it, it was like that standard, and I can tell you, the conversations at the time, I mean, that standard was really around buffering standards between multifamily and general commercial, between White City and, or in White City, or in the areas that were affected by the Alameda fire, right? They're now in Phoenix, but for a long time they were in the county between Phoenix and Medford, right? Those pretty highly intensively developed areas. So that standard is it's pretty intensive even as a buffering standard in urban areas. And I actually think in a rural area it would, it's pretty expensive once you start doing it on 5 acres, right? Very expensive. And I think would actually not have the desired effect. It would look pretty weird once you start building masonry walls and stuff like that out in a rural area like this. So we contacted Lori Sager, registered landscape architect, who's based out of Jacksonville, and we specifically requested her, hey, take a look at the site, come up with something that feels right for a rural area like this. The clients observed that they have a pretty decent chain link fence on the north and south side, and they would like to be able to continue to use that rather than just tear it down and have to replace it with something, because again, that much length of chain link fence even is pretty expensive, right? Let alone masonry wall. So this is the plan that she came up with. I think it works pretty good. Essentially, they would put slats. They would put slats in the existing chain link fence and probably do a few repairs north and south. Then the plantings would be on the other side, so you have screening, but then you actually have the plantings, so you can, if you're driving down Rogue River Drive, you see the plants rather than the wall or the wall, or if you did the type A buffer yard, the wall or the chain link fence in this instance, right? It would look better. Staff was concerned about the lands, the buffer yard being on the other two. Well, the clients own the other two properties, and we're doing a tentative plat on the one to the south. We can just provide a maintenance and landscape easement there and record one on the north side. That sort of thing is done all the time, just like shared parking agreements in urban areas and all kinds of things, pretty standard, really. And then on the back side, then you would have to install the chain link fence back there, because that's just barbed wire and stuff back there. So you'd have that fence to install. I think this is a pretty appropriate intensity of landscape buffering for where this is and what's around it, right? So it shows where stuff would go on the plan view, and then there's a typical that's showing the number of plants per 100 lineal feet, and that's a to scale drawing there, right? So you've got essentially 2 significant trees, red oak and incense cedar, every 100 feet, right? Plus the bushes and the shrubs, right? And that's the other thing I would point out as well is that in the rural areas, you're watering your landscaping based upon available water from well, right? And versus really this buffer, between Phoenix and Medford, it's assuming you're on Medford water with, as much water as you want to pay for, right? So this little lower intensity, over time it's going to get started. It will require some irrigation to get started, but I think mostly when it's done, you won't have to add a lot of water to it, which I think is good in a rural area. So on that, we would just request you approve the plans, approve this buffer plan, because I do think it's adequate. And then the only other thing I want to speak to, and they're going to come up and talk, and Commissioner Roberts mentioned KCI. They are looking to buy this site and relocate, and they have a really neat business, and they're going to come up and talk to you about it. They're competing on a world stage. It's the kind of thing that is really hard to get to locate in the county, and so I'm going to let them speak to that. And they're going to request some adjustments to or really elimination of the hours of operation, not because they wouldn't comply with them most of the time, but because some of the times they have a contract with United Airlines that there's big financial consequences to not getting that work done on time, and delays cost a lot of money. I think in reality, most of the time they would operate in their normal hours, which is probably not, I think it's probably fine, but I'll let them speak to you about it, and then I may add some comments at the end. And with that, I'm going to wrap up my comments, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions that the board has.
I actually had a question for staff. I mean, I hear what you're saying about the buffer, and I like to try to impute a little reasonable discretion to these things, and sometimes I'm sorely disappointed that land use law doesn't allow reasonable discretion in a lot of cases. But in this case, does staff see any reason to me, if they're going to put the jointly owned property at this point, they're going to establish the easement, the landscaping easement, is there an issue with that plan? And again, I think the other points that were made about what's appropriate and serves a purpose, there should be some discretion. I'm hoping there is. So can you answer those questions for me?
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm always work better when I have the code in front of me to know exactly what we're looking at as where the discretion can come. There can be discretion. There's some flexibility in section 9.2. The major concern, another concern with, this is a difficult venue to be able to be discussing the standards and what's applicable or not. But to that said, one of the issues is that in the code, it talks about Schedule B buffering. I think that's a 20-foot buffer. They have a 10-foot buffer located on here. The code actually doesn't require front yard landscaping, if I recall correctly. That was something that they stipulated to, so that wasn't gonna, that's not an issue. I'm not sure what buffering they're planning to do on the north and east side, because they don't have the little schematic of these little trees or whatever on those sides. So this is highly inadequate for staff to review at this level. Is there discretion available? I think there is. There's some discretion about what is the fire, low water. I do a lot better with the code in front of me. We could go through that if you want me to.
If I may, maybe I can add a little bit of clarity to it. LDO 9.2.4 does have a provision that you can have it on adjoining property. It has to be proportionate, has to have the proper easements. Mm-hmm. What's a little different about this one is we're going to have light industrial out in a rural residential area. Usually when you see those things, it's commercial, and they're shared zoning, so the zoning is a little different. What I may suggest is that it be kept as a condition, but maybe not approved today. That way staff will be able to have a chance to look at it, make sure that it meets the standards within the code when we finally get the easement, get the rest of the paperwork, basically. This came in yesterday, I believe.
Monday, yeah.
Monday. So we really haven't had a chance to review it as part of this record. But if you have it as a condition, we can make sure that it meets LDL standards I guess getting back to your question, yes, there is a provision that it can be on adjoining property.
Okay. And there
Or
are,
proportionally.
and there is some room for reasonable discretion. I mean, we are talking about properties with a little different character than
Yeah,
what we're normally talking about. And if you're looking at a physically developed exception, that's just what it is, an exception. So
Yep.
standards.
Exactly. There's definitely discretion on, especially considering the unusual circumstances of the rural residential versus light industrial.
Yeah, okay.
I want to follow up with a question, because it was presented that there could be a maintenance agreement. Is that something that is
Yeah.
real?
That is
Okay.
actually something that's in our code, that if you have it on adjoining property, it has to be proportional. It has to have the proper easement or legal ability that they're going to maintain it, and there has to be a maintenance agreement. So those would be some of the things that we would be looking for
Okay.
as it came in.
All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Harlan, come on up. Have some
Oh,
clarity, maybe?
Yeah, on the discretion, there's like the base buffer yard 9.2.2, the table, and then it says one buffering scheme, and then right below it says in the code, alternate buffering scheme, the director may approve an alternative buffering design prepared by an Oregon registered landscape architect, which we did, when he finds that the design, when compared to the standard screening and planting scheme, will provide a comparable buffer between existing and/or anticipated uses and avoid significant adverse impacts to the livability or value of adjoining properties. So
Okay.
there's pretty, I mean, in this, it's assuming it's a development review, so it's saying the director, but the reality is in this context, it's going before the board.
Yeah.
So I think you have wide discretion to say it's fine. I think you know, if you want staff to look at it a little bit more, I think one of the ways that it could be handled right is to say, hey, and you know, it takes a little while to get these plans prepared, and it wasn't actually, you know, and holidays and everything. So you know, if you wanted to revise or sort of make a finding also to say the board's okay with an alternative buffering scheme that is worked out and the director can approve, then something like that would be fine. I just don't want to be locked into especially the type, whatever it is, the buffer yard B standard, which is 20 feet wide and a concrete wall, and that's going to look weird, and it's going to cost $300,000, and it's just like, and then we got to water that thing, and it's too much for what's out there, I think.
I honestly would rather and prefer not to have that condition hanging out there too. That's why I'm asking about the discretion, and at this point, what is anticipated that this particular buffer plan, this proposed plan, would be deficient? And is there a threshold, some sort of scrutiny you need to put on that to determine at what level does it have to meet the letter of the requirements? And again, the character of this property is different than probably what we're looking at normally that's requiring these real extensive buffers.
To that, planning and zoning has a lot of subjectivity to it. That's why planning decisions come out, and there can be differences in interpretation. But with that, we would be the ones looking at it, and I can tell you that part of what we would be looking at is the fact that it is already in a rural area. So things like the having a masonry wall, while maybe the neighbors may want something like that for noise, whatever, but we have not had any, we have not had that within the record. It would have to look at the character, we would look at it a bit discretionary, looking at the character of the area. So even something that would be, I don't know how to describe it other than fancy trellises and stuff like that would probably be out of the ordinary out there. Buffering would mainly be that it buffered the activities that happened in an industrial area versus the rural residential area. I don't know if I circled that one enough for you
I
on
guess, well,
there.
here's the other thing that I'm looking at is this activity has been taking place for I don't know how many years, many years without the buffer. Haven't had, I understand, complaints or issues with that. So complying, of course, is adding another layer, but it hasn't been an issue. And if there's that much discretion, then I think we should look at it reasonably and say some buffer is better than what's no buffer. That's been the situation that's existed and just fine for years.
Yeah, and along those lines, Commissioner, I would point out, we volunteered this because typically the buffer standard applies when you come in for development. In the context of a physically developed exception, essentially what we're getting approval to do as a permitted use is to use what's there, right? And so there's a building permitting process and stuff like that that has to be met as you get to change of occupancies, and if you have a change of occupancy or whatever. But as far as the land use review, you're just basically getting blessed to use what's physically been developed on the site. So this was something that but there is an element in the exception criteria that it be found to be compatible. So there isn't actually a hook to a specific development standard for buffering. We specifically were like, hey, let's install some buffering to meet the compatibility standard, which does apply to the goal exception. And our initial thought was like, oh, let's just use the buffer yard. But we flipped it open and we went like, oh, this is like a little over the top for this area. And so we did what the code says. We hired a landscape architect and took their recommendations. And I think it works pretty good.
If I might add to that, and that's a key, right, what he just said at the end. There is a landscape architect that's involved.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the considerations that you're looking at, the conflicts between the neighbors, we assume is part of that landscaping plan. So,
I think it'll look better.
It is an alternate. It would be an alternate plan to what we have in the code.
Okay, well, I think those are good sometimes, but I'm not always agreed with when it comes to the land use planning gods.
Land use planning has a lot of one-size-fits-all. This is not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Exactly, that was my point. All right, thank you.
So I think I'm done unless you guys have additional
Any other
questions of me.
questions?
I have one more question, and either of staff or Jay. Is there nothing that has been clarified for the existing square feet of the building? Did I hear that we don't have that, or?
Oh, no, it's in the record what we have for assessors, and so the assessor's records for the buildings. I think maybe what's being requested there as prior to a change of use is like a more specific floor plan of exactly, interior wall to interior wall dimensions, right? I can tell you from having done this a long time, usually the assessor's pretty close as to what size the buildings are, because people will complain about their taxes if it's wrong, unless they say it's, actually smaller than it really is, which doesn't happen that often.
So is that a condition that you need to provide planning staff?
I think
For
they
this
have it
permit?
in there, and we
Oh,
don't
you
have
have
a
it.
problem with that. That is in there, right?
I have a 50,000.
Okay.
Everything is talked about approximately.
Yeah. They just want a more precise measurement of the building square footages, which is not a big deal.
And this is I've got around 50,000 square foot total footprint. So again, if you were to change building and go, you're not going to go 3 stories, but are you able to increase?
Not usable. You couldn't all of a sudden build a 7 mezzanine.
Right.
No, you can't do that. It's essentially the usable square footage. Some of the buildings could get under the height standards of the code. If they got replaced, they could get
Another
built in the
floor.
same footprint, but I don't think you can add more usable floor square footage.
Okay.
That would then be beyond what you can get done as a physically developed exception.
Okay, great.
So it's a good question.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. All right, we do have one individual signed up, and is it Jessica Richards? Yes. Come on up, give your name and address, please, for the record.
I'm Jessica Richards. I'm speaking on behalf of Keith Consolidated Industries at 1718 Antelope Road in White City. Keith Consolidated Industries was founded in 1992 by William Keith, a 21-year veteran, and for over 30 years has been a part of this community. We employ local residents, support local businesses, and consistently operated in compliance with county regulations. Our records reflect that we are responsible operators and great neighbors. The hours currently proposed are not reflective of how we successfully operate for decades. KCI has long operated from 6 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. 4 days a week, with overtime and occasional weekends as needed to fulfill customer orders. Limiting these hours would not be a minor adjustment for us. It would disrupt normal business functions, restrict our ability to meet customers' demands, and impact our ability to operate safely and efficiently. During the summer months, KCI begins operations as early as 5 a.m., and this is directly tied to employee health and safety. OSHA requires employers to take reasonable steps to protect workers from heat-related illnesses, including reducing exposure during periods of extreme heat. Starting early allows physical demand work to be completed during cooler morning hours and help reduce heat stress as temperature rise. It is important for the county to understand the operational reality we are facing. KCI is at its capacity in our current location. There is no available industrial property in Jackson County that meets our needs. And even if land were available, a 3-year timeline to plan and build a new facility located locally is not compatible with our current business requirements. KCI will be scaling into aerospace manufacturing and pursuing an AS9100 certification. That process requires predictable operations, sufficient capacity, and the ability to meet strict delivery and quality requirements. Imposing operation conditions that restrict our ability to function competitively undermines the effort and places long-term growth and local jobs at risk. From a community perspective, these hours do not support economic stability or long-term local investment. Reasonable flexibility allows businesses like ours to remain viable, continue to provide jobs, and help contribute positively to the local economy while remaining respectful to neighboring uses. We are not asking to operate without limits. We are asking for reasonable, clear, and practical conditions that align similar with industrial uses and recognize our longstanding record with this community. We respectfully request full clarity on conditions at the conclusion of this meeting, so expectations are clearly understood by both the county and KCI. We thank you for your time and your consideration on this matter.
Thank you. Questions for? So basically, it's just opening earlier is your main request. And I guess my question would be, I don't know what type of noise or obviously there's traffic coming in and out at that time. That would be the biggest impact probably to neighbors, or anything else that we would need to consider in your opinion as far as impacts?
No, it's mainly just starting earlier, and we do have overtime where we do work on Fridays and Saturdays, but it's mainly the health and safety issues that we're having with our employees during the hotter months here in the valley.
And how many employees do you anticipate?
We have
working?
70.
And these early hours wouldn't entail all 70 coming in at a 5 o'clock hour, would it?
Yes, it does.
It would be all of them at the same time?
Yes.
Okay.
Except for administration.
And if these, again, these hours of operations were changed in this approval, this would apply to any other use that another operator may purchase the building that may have greater impacts? So there's a possibility that there would be more impacts than we're talking about with the proposed buyer of the building. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, no one else has signed up yet?
You want to speak? Yeah.
Please, come on up.
I'll sign up.
Yeah, well.
I'm sorry.
You're signed up.
Oh, good.
Just give your name and address for the,
Don Blazer,
we need you over.
wrong spot.
All right.
Don Blazer, 1800 Rogue River Drive, Eagle Point, resident, and I've been there since 1973. I was there when NVEX Corporation was there. I don't know if you're familiar with NVEX or not. And a couple of questions. There was at one time an airport there that you could land and take off from. So I'm just kind of curious. I'm assuming that will be out of the picture. I think I can speak for the neighborhood, having lived there. My reason I'm here, my biggest concern would be the buffering. What's going to look like between zonings. It's a non-conforming zoning. However, I have a dual capacity here. I've also am a member of SCORE and have been trying to get businesses out to our end of the valley. And I was working closely with Shady Cove right before they had their kind of blow up. So in one sense, we're happy to see the employment grow on our end of the valley. In another sense, as a neighbor, I'm concerned about the buffer zone. I don't think it needs to be elaborate, but I did talk to Jay a little bit, and it sounds like they're going to put some screening between some of the fencing. I'd hate that barbed wire. I'd hate the chain link to not be there, because it's a great way to buffer the areas. And so my main concern is, how are you going to buffer this? I'm assuming all the due diligence has been done with it, whatever environmental impacts have been taking place in the past. I'm not sure there's been that many. I know Alumaweld's been there for years, and then they've been, been abandoned for maybe 20 years now. However, our concerns are going to be the buffer zone and noise. I don't know exactly what the corporation does, but if you've got to, and I get up early, but if you've got to start hearing noise early in the morning, it's going to be a disaster. So there'll be lots of complaints. But I don't sense that's going to be a major issue. And I think the road's designed to take that level of traffic. So really, that's about it. So I'm speaking for it, and I'm speaking against it. I'm not speaking against it. I'm speaking to try to understand how you're going to buffer this. We don't want to see elaborate concrete walls. It's not that environment. But we would like to see it screened off in some way, so you can't see through it, or they don't have to look at us and we don't have to look at them. Okay? That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody questions? All right. Anyone else wishing to speak? Your rebuttal? Come on up.
I'll agree with and rebut Mr. Mr. Blazer. No, we agree. I mean, we're proposing buffering on the east side. One thing on the set of plans I would point out is, on the east side, it shows a strip of buffering, but there's as if it's right behind the building, but the reality is that property, it just doesn't fit on the sheet. The property goes back quite a bit, right? There's a pretty big open space area, no building area, and then the property line. And on the east side, that buffering would go on the property line, right? So that which is shown on the property line, but just there's a blank space missing there. And I think on the hours of operation, there's a couple parts to that. One is, I would just say, don't go into too many planning commission hearings with a recommendation for denial. We work really hard not to, so was already kind of, no pun intended with Alumaweld, but rocking the boat, moving that forward to the planning commission. Those hours came out of permits from the 70s, right? And I guess what I would say is, it's something I've always, just as a planner, hasn't made a lot of sense to me, that in more of your rural areas where you can have something like, a large farming operation, for example, that ships pears all around the world, they can have a farm labor, site that can have 200 or 300 people in the farm zone. There's no restrictions on them. And during harvest, they're coming and going at all hours of the day and night, right? And they're running equipment and they're doing all that kind of stuff, right? And really, I think what you hear from KCI is that, it's similar. That's not their regular hours of operation, but when they're up against it, they need to get work out the door. And the other thing I would point out is the morning hours of operation are, what KCI said is true, is there did not used to be those those are relatively new, those employee requirements for heat avoidance. That is a new thing. It is a real thing. It is something that has been provided to us from the state. right? And so I think that is a real thing, and we should account for that a little bit, and, you know, from a human health standpoint. So that's, I think it's really important to them. We're representing the property owner. I mean, obviously, we would like to have less restrictions from an hours of operation, but I just wanted to give you that was the history. We, as the applicant's agent, we offered that because that came out of a permit from the 70s, and at that point, we didn't really necessarily know where the KCI thing was going. I mean, we definitely didn't when we first filed it, and so that's just kind of sometimes how these things evolve. That's what I would say, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions?
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Hi,
Hello.
if you don't mind, my name is Brad Morgan. I'm a project manager with KCI.
Got to get your address real quick for the
Oh,
record.
1718 Antelope Road.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to kind of respond to your buffer deal. We have always looked at this as a partnership between KCI and the community. We have always planned to make some kind of very, very nice looking slatting across the, around the fence. We're going to be putting fence again on the north side of it completely. So that would be slatted also. And along the back, whatever we need to do with that, there's a 6-foot berm back there that comes up off of the property above it. If we need to put something on that berm, we can do that. If it's in front of the berm, we can do that, whatever. But also want to just say that this partnership with us and the community, we've been this way for a long time. If there's anybody around the community that needed help in this particular area as we move there, we are more than happy to help it in any way. We're basically a full service fabrication shop. Anything gets broke, we can fix it. And we'd love to have the community bring things to us that they need to be helped with. And that's pretty much all I'd like to say, other than we've been working very hard to get this done, and it will be a very good move for us.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question? Any questions? Okay. We can only have one.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
one bite at the apple unless you're the applicant. Sorry.
Yeah,
No.
I've got one question, which I
I-
could see.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Oh, I'm so,
Yeah, we only can allow one
That's fine.
bite, like I say, at the testimony. Unless you're the applicant, which in this case, there can be rebuttals. You have no rebuttal. Okay. Sorry about that. It's just the rules we have to
that
follow.
wasn't a rebuttal, it was a question. That's fine.
No, I realize.
Oh,
All right. With that, then, we will close the public hearing. And let's see, do we have exhibits to admit, and how many?
There are 17.
All right. Take a motion.
I would move to admit Exhibit 1 through 17 into the Board of Commissioners record for file number 439-25-00003-LRP, and to close the record.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Sparacino?
Yes.
Commissioner Roberts?
Yes.
Commissioner Dyer?
Yes, thank you. Okay, with that, we'll move on to deliberations and a recommendation on the application. Anybody like to start?
Well, I'm not sure I have all the conditions, because that's what it seems to be based on. When I looked at the Planning Commission on the first hearing where they actually heard testimony, it was totally unanimous to support. And when it came back with the conditions in December, it was like 4-1. But it seems to be the landscape buffering is huge, the biggest, and seems to be the most workable in maintenance agreement, or however the applicant works with planning, in my opinion, seems to be like, say, flexible or discretionary. The precise measurement of the building is possible. The traffic study was submitted, and I'm not sure if and the hours of operation. I don't know if there's any other conditions I'm missing.
The new exhibit has the list of conditions.
That's 79. What, so is there others that we didn't address?
There's the hours of operation, ongoing square footage. I think you touched on best reasonable efforts to maintain internal circulation and lighting controls. I think those are the only ones that weren't included there.
Yeah, I didn't hear any issues on those, or that's workable as well. I think, my opinion is, as a pro-business person, I think it's an amazing opportunity. A company that's been here 31 years and employs nearly 100 people and has been a compliant partner in our community, and there's not enough hoops to jump through. They have certainly, I think, achieved that, in my opinion, but that's just my general take on the hearing.
Randy?
I agree. The only issue I believe needs to be truly addressed is the hours of operation, and if that's something that we can adjust and still maintain that reasonableness of quietness in the neighborhood or the region. But and how early it would need to operate, 5 to 8 or whatever.
In my opinion, 5, when you're looking at heat impacts, which the state has imposed upon businesses, it's huge. When you're looking at that part of the Upper Rogue, it's a bustling community when boats are going up and down that hour. It is, I bet they could even build a boat, but, it's not, I mean, it's a bustling little area with the river there.
Well, I think the hours could be an issue if it weren't for, we have these site-specific restrictions and limiting uses to prohibiting some higher impact activities that would probably create more of a impacts again to neighbors with those types of hours. That should be addressed again by limiting the types of activities. There's also probably a traffic mitigating factor in that if you're coming out there earlier, you're not hitting normal rush hour traffic. I don't know what kind of rush hour traffic there is on Railroad Drive, but there is a mitigating factor there. And I think as far as, meeting the criteria of the physically developed exception to Goal 14, obviously we see that there is a substantial physical development, 50,000 square feet of industrial structures. We talked about the site-specific limit to max existing character, and again, the long-term historical non-conforming use supports the compatibility and stability element. And again, with these conditions, I think they're reasonable. I would agree. I think that the buffering and the landscaping needs to match the character, and a one-size-fits-all doesn't fit all. We know that on just about any situation. I'm looking at the landscaping plans, and it to me, again, it seems to be adequate or more than adequate. So I've had all the questions I needed answered in my opinion on this.
And I think one of the other conditions is to finish the approval of the 3 5-acre parcels too.
Right, and that will obviously complete this project for them. And again, I do, of course, part of this, even though it's not in the, I guess there is some kind of an economic consideration, but it's not, I'm not seeing that in the exception criteria, but I do think that obviously we need to do what we can to support it. It sounds like some pretty good paying jobs, an important industry, and I think we should appreciate our businesses a whole lot more than we do in this state and in this county. I hope that we always do. I think we do, and in this case, I think it's incumbent on us to consider that. So,
And I will ask Mr. Philbrick on the motion, which I'd like to make. The parcel that we're wanting to prove is 5.7. Do I have to read 16.59, that's not what we're approving or looking to approve for moving rural residential to light industrial.
The motion just identifies the property subject to the application. And because the subdivision hasn't been completed yet, that even though the zone change only applies to a portion of it, the motion would be for the entire property.
So when they do their separation, do they have to apply for rural residential for those other two?
No.
Okay. All right, with that, based on the evidence and testimony, I move to approve the application for a minor comprehensive plan map and zoning map amendment to change the comprehensive plan map from rural residential land to light industrial land and rezone a parcel containing 16.59 acres from rural residential 5 to light industrial on a property described as Township 35 South, Range 1 West, Section 05, Tax Lot 1700, located at 2000 Rogue River Drive, Eagle Point. The application was submitted by J. Harlan, CSA Planning LTD, and the agent for Page Stevens and Brad Engel, file number 439-25-00003-LRP.
Second.
Well, we probably need to mention the conditions that
We-
we're going
yeah.
to be imposing.
Correct. Commissioner Roberts, would you like to stipulate to changes to the conditions in your motion?
To
The recommended commissions or conditions?
include the recommended conditions for approval.
Well, but
The-
as far as the hours, we would change because those conditions show us 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and the request was for 5 a.m. And I think we discussed that was something we felt was a reasonable condition to impose.
Hours, the buffer, then the existing site square footage of the building and the approval of the traffic study.
Yeah, those I think we've left as is. The buffer, I feel confident that this meets a buffer condition, that the proposed plan by the applicant meets if there is discretion, a discretionary buffer
With
condition.
that maintenance agreement.
Yeah, and with what they have proposed as opposed to, again,
With all
traditional.
those conditions being met.
Is that going to be?
Do you need something
So
more specific?
to clarify, your motion is to approve removing the buffer condition and modifying the time of operation condition and any other, removing the traffic study condition.
So, yeah, I guess.
I'm assuming approving the traffic
Separate.
engineering report that was submitted yesterday or Monday or whatever.
And as far as the buffering, I mean, I don't want to remove the condition altogether, but the condition as satisfied by the proposal of the applicant? I mean,
You could approve the plan presented by the applicant.
Okay.
What I might suggest is you keep a condition that they record a maintenance easement.
Right, okay, yeah, well, definitely, I think that's part of the condition.
And of course, assuming you approve, staff would draft an ordinance, which you would have an opportunity to review before the final approval.
Okay, well, if that's a fully sufficient motion, I think we can move on then, if that appears to be that to the council.
Does that reflect your motion?
Yes.
Okay.
And under Robert's Rules of Order, I would accept that as a friendly amendment to the original motion.
Thank you.
All right.
Commissioner Roberts,
Yes.
Commissioner Sparacino,
Yes.
Commissioner Dyer.
Yes. Okay. Then I will ask staff to prepare the ordinance of approval and set the dates for the first and second reading and public hearing of the ordinance. First reading, March 4th, 2026 at 9:30 a.m. I'm assuming here in the courthouse auditorium. Second reading for March 18th, 2026 at 1:30 p.m. also here in the courthouse auditorium. And with that, we will adjourn the meeting.